Welcome to the Backstage Creative. My name is Krista Copper. On this podcast, I interview people who work behind the scenes of theater. As a musician, I am obsessed with theater. I think it's such a beautiful art form. I think it's incredible how all of these different worlds come together to create one product. And I love an audience, and I love, as you know, as a musician, we get to play the same show over and over and over, sometimes for months, and I love that. And I also really enjoy talking to people who are in the theater world and hearing their story and hearing their background and why they chose theater and advice they have for young people, their design process, their how they handle stress, how they take care of themselves, all of the good topics. I really enjoy talking to people about that. I enjoyed it so much that I wanted more of it. So I decided to start a podcast where I interviewed these people and basically gave myself an excuse to reach out to people that I didn't know or people whose work I admired and asked them to sit down and have a conversation with me. I am so grateful for the people who have agreed to do that and have sat down and chatted with me. At the end of every one of these conversations, I think, wow, that was the best use of that hour. Could think a few other activities that would have been as beneficial for me in my growth as the conversation that I just had. I hope all of you listening are doing well. When I recorded this interview and this intro, it's in what month are we in? um, we're in the month of May. We're in May 2020, in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. Yes, I just had to look at my computer to figure out what month we're in because every day is Groundhog Day. Every day is the same. And hopefully we'll end soon and hopefully we can get back to work soon. I've been having dreams about being in tech rehearsals, which make me happy, but then I wake up and realize, oh, it was a dream. And then I'm sad. But one of these days we're going to get back to work. We're going to muscle our way through tech rehearsals and be able to soak up the energy from an audience once again and be able to create and collaborate together. Today is my conversation with Tyler Micoleau. Tyler is a Tony-winning lighting designer. He's been in the theater scene for over 20 years, he said, and I admire and respect people so much who are able to last that long and to be able to hang in there for that amount of time. And so I enjoyed sitting down and hearing his stories and his wisdom, and I'm grateful that he took the time to do this. Tyler does have a dog who has some opinions about life, and so you'll hear him growling and barking sometimes throughout the interview. I tried to edit out as much of it as I could, but I also didn't want to take out too much of what Tyler was saying, and so you'll hear him expressing himself or herself. I don't know the dog. I don't know the gender of the dog, but anyway, here we go. Here's my conversation with Tyler Micoleau. So I was just listening to your interview with Corey Paddock of the In One podcast.
Yes. That's now like what, 4 or 5 years old, probably.
It was like 2015, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I went through who you've talked to as well, and I didn't get to listen to any yet, but I know everyone you've interviewed. I mean, everyone from New York anyway that you've interviewed
hmm
for the most part. But you've
Yeah.
got people from all over the country. It's great.
Yeah, that's one of my big goals is to have, obviously New York is like the center of the theater world, but there's so many great scenes in Chicago and Kansas City and Denver and Texas, and so I want to talk to everyone, not just the people in New York. So
Yes. Yeah. That's important.
I wanted to talk to you about your Tony. Is that a good place for you to start with?
Sure. um, No, I mean it's been a great thing. It's just I'm a little bashful about it, and and it's sort of like I've been doing this now and been in the city like 26 years or so, and so having that kind of acknowledgement, is sort of it's not late in my career at all, but I mean there's a lot of work that preceded it. Um,
hmm
so it's just a funny place to start in a way because it's sort of like the icing on the cake.
Mm, sure.
um, but it's a good place to start. I'm sure. I won the Tony Award for the musical The Band's Visit, which was only on Broadway for about a year and a half, and then was doing a really nice national tour around the U.S. Until this virus came around, and they've had to stop temporarily, hopefully. But at some point, it will be coming through a town near you. It's been mostly on the East Coast. Yeah, East Coast and down south a little bit. But who knows when it will start up again? But it will start up again, I'm sure.
Mhm. How does life change, or does life change after you win an award of that magnitude? I guess.
I get asked that quite a bit, and it doesn't really. I mean, it was actually my first Broadway show, so in a way, doing having a successful Broadway show is actually more important than whether or not. I mean, it helps to have a Tony Award as well, but there's sort of a glass ceiling about Broadway, and that you have to work on Broadway. You can't work on Broadway until you've worked on Broadway.
Mhm.
Um, and so to finally have a show that started off Broadway and then transferred to Broadway was really exciting. And but they got me in the door, and showed people that I can actually succeed in that environment. And and that has led on to now. I was about to work on my third Broadway show 2 weeks ago, and then we had to walk away. But yeah, at least it's opened up that door for more opportunities for Broadway work, which is exciting. Yeah, and the Tony Award's nice in that it's obviously everyone recognizes it, even if they haven't seen the show. But it's not like my phone is ringing off the hook the next day, like, oh, finally, we can, because it's still very much a business of like, who knows you, who knows your work. That's going to actually be the most important factor to getting hired. Yeah, I mean, maybe one or two people who saw the show, regardless of the Tony, invited me to come and talk to them, because they didn't know who I was, but they liked the work they saw. But nobody's saying like, "Oh, you got a Tony Award, come into my office," you know, sight unseen. But other than that, it's sort of like business as usual.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah,
and it almost like has to be, because if you're, if the Tony Award is like your end all of goal of your career, then like now what do you do?
right, right, and yeah, and it certainly wasn't. I mean, I've been doing it long enough that it's a really great thing to have, and to go through that whole experience. But I look forward to putting out work out there that might be eligible again for future Tony Awards. But it's all been about just continuing to do the work and enjoy what I'm doing, and then it's nice when things like that happen.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, like you said, like icing on the cake. Like you don't need it, but it's nice.
Yeah, exactly. And that's to me is a healthy way to look at it. I mean, because you can get yourself all caught up in. I mean, this business can tends to be competitive in some ways. It really shouldn't be, but there's a lot of people looking to do the same work, and there's just not that many opportunities. So you can make yourself crazy trying to go for the gold or something like that, and get really, really frustrated and depressed about it. Or you can just try to enjoy everything you're doing along the way.
Mhm. Do you think that competition like fosters creativity, or do you think competition kind of kills innovation and kills risk taking and
I mean, again, it's sort of your outlook on it. I mean, you could, as I said, it can consume you, and it'll prevent you from taking some of the risks that you might need to take, or the leaps you might need to take to either push your craft or push your career forward farther. Or you can just have a healthy regard for it and know that it's out there, and or keep the strength of the confidence, I guess, that'll allow you to take the leap when you need to.
Mhm.
Um, on a small scale, I mean, I certainly every project I do, I try to keep like 15% of it is something I've never tried before, or is an experiment. But I've got that remaining 85% of experience and have tried this before to sort of fall back on in case that 15% sort of goes crazy.
That's a really good idea. I like that you have like a percentage because that probably helps when you hear about a new technique or something and you like want to get really excited and carried away with it, but kind of keeping yourself in check and then also like help keeping yourself growing, like trying new things and not letting your work get stale.
Exactly. I mean, and it's obviously not that quantifiable. It's just sort of like to have in the back of my head that you know, feeling how much because I have gotten myself. You can tell as you're approaching a project or in the middle of the process when you're like, oh, this really way too much. I've really gone way too far in the like unknown territory here, um, and it could really bite me in the ass later. So I've got to scale back a bit and shift the balance back to some things that I can rely on in the moment.
hmm I've been so looking forward to this conversation. I love talking to designers. Like as a musician, like when I come into the process of putting up a show, that's usually when the designers are starting to leave, right? Like I come in,
Right,
a few
right.
days before Tech Week, and then sometimes I'll talk to the designers, but usually our paths don't cross. And so, yeah, it's fun to talk to all of you because I don't know much about your world.
And I'm just thinking about I how rarely I get to interact a lot with the pit orchestra or musicians on a gig. It just depends on the nature of things. But yeah, I'm so far out front, and oftentimes they're either underground or backstage or in another room. It's nice when we can talk a bit, but rarely do we get to do that. Except I think it happens more often on pieces where I'm more involved with the process and the musicians are involved in the process. If it's like a band or a very specific group of musicians that are integral to the creation of the music, then I might have more interaction with them if
hmm
I'm lucky, rather than just contracted musicians coming in once the show's sort of up and running. Yeah, I mean I haven't heard, but it sounds like you've done some exploring based on the people you've talked to, of just of like the parallels between design and music. And it's like a lot of designers are musicians, have backgrounds as musicians or
hmm
some sort of connection to. I think everyone has some connection to music, whether they can actually play or read music is another thing. But it's yeah, at least in lighting, especially, there's just a lot of parallels, and it's useful to sort of explore that and know that that exists.
Can you give some examples of parallels that you're thinking of?
I mean, lighting designers are very interested in the rhythm of a piece. If you sort of macro out in terms of like the dramatic structure of a play or a musical, and then beats within a scene, like actors talk about acting beats, and like there might be several in any given scene, and so I'm interested in those beats and sort of rhythmically how one relates to the next, and 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 how we get from one scene to another scene transitionally. It's all very similar. Music and lighting design share the relationship to time in terms of like we're also very interested in how things move through a period of time, which I think is I guess maybe projection design also shares that. I mean, definitely does. But so like rhythm, time, and then just in composition. In some, I mean, I think we share similar vocabulary in some regards to composition, but it's super important to what I do, even though it may not apply directly. I don't know. I mean, that'd be. I'm curious what you think of that, like the structure of music and what like a structure of a painting and the composition of a painting. I mean, there's definitely parallels. What am I saying? I mean, uh,
hmm
rhythm, line, contrast, brightness and darkness and notes and things like that. It's all
Hmm.
similar, I think.
Yeah. Whereas music is more obviously like aural brightness and aural
Yeah,
um lightness, light is like visual. And so yeah, I guess it's very very similar, just using a different sense.
yeah, exactly. Early on, I was, I had a mentor that was very interested in like synesthesia,
Mm.
sort of where those two senses overlap,
Mhm.
um, color vision and music, and he was he was got me onto the movie Fantasia,
Uh-huh.
um, which is really an exciting piece for its time. But it talks a lot. I mean, it actually explores a lot of that relationship of color and music and visual imagery. Anyway, I'm digressing, but that's yeah. So I think we share a kinship between musicians and design.
Yeah, I'm gonna be thinking about that. I like that. Take us through, and I'm sure it differs based on what show you're working on, but like a general
And the
process
kind
for.
of work, yeah. I'm just thinking of like what's exciting about lighting also is that there's so much. There are many different kinds. I mean, there's architectural lighting design, there's landscape lighting, there's concert lighting, which is really pushes that relationship of light and music, probably to its most extreme. There's dance lighting. Then there's lighting for opera and theater, and within theater, there's plays and there's musicals. And then you get into the whole world of like film and TV, where there's like cinematography and photography on its own is also very much about light and design. So there's like such a breadth of there's lots of people for you to talk to out there, from all walks of the industry. Yeah, and so for me specifically, I mean, my process is dependent a little bit on what kind of lighting I'm doing. It's important for any young lighting designer, any designer out there, really to diversify sort of as much as possible, because you never know when you never know when you're not going to be able to actually do a stage lighting design, and you might need to do something else outside of the theater. Like for instance, right now I'm writing putting together proposals for the lighting of a office space in a warehouse in California that I have never been in, but I'm trying to I'm trying to create renderings of what the light might look like in a space that I've not seen, but only in pictures. But and it's a different kind of lighting. I'm doing architectural lighting, but it's nice that I had a little bit of background in that, so I could in this time right now when I can't do a theatrical lighting design, I could do that, or at least pretend to. So anyway, I mean, process wise, it's pretty similar in some regards. I mean, like I'm very much interested in architecture and space, and like what kind of space a play or a musical is being performed in. And so the first person I go to almost immediately is the set designer, if there is one. If there isn't, then I look to the director and just the theater space itself and like what architecturally is exciting about it. And I start thinking about vocabulary, lighting vocabulary, just what kind of tools I want to have available. Yeah, so it's really just about like exploring a space or a set that creates the space that some drama will happen in, or a music will happen in, or dance will happen in, and figuring out how to sort of exploit those things, the elements of that space with light, so that I had now then have like a list of options and a vocabulary that I can use to help tell the story. And then once I explored that, I will then start thinking about like what kind of light sources I'll have available to me, either because they're already in the space, or I get to rent them, and I get to specify to some degree what kind of light. Sorry, is the dog really coming through a lot?
I
um,
mean, I can hear, but it's okay.
it's okay.
Yeah.
Um, and or if it's like a situation where we get to actually buy the lighting sources, and I can be very very specific about what I want, and what aspects of those lighting fixtures will help me with the vocabulary I want to use. And that's all sort of preparatory things. I mean, it's more like just like practice and getting all my instruments in order. And then when we actually get into production and in the space, and then it's funny because one of my favorite lighting designers is a fellow named Chris Ackerland, and he calls it jazz. I mean, it really is an improv.
Hmm.
It's structured improvisation is really what it is.
Hmm.
I create a rough layout of potential tools and vocabulary, but then I don't necessarily have a fully realized plan in my head as to how I'll use them, because I want the most sort of honest response I can give to what I'm seeing, either in the final rehearsal of a play or a concert or anything really. But it's just so I can give like sort of an honest response and just go with my instincts in terms of what tools might and vocabulary might tell the story the best in that moment. And then we can go back and oftentimes if there's an opportunity to throw together a draft, and then collectively we can talk about what we just seen, whether it works and how it might get better, and then go through the process of fine tuning and then sort of lock it down if it's something that's going to run for a while. So that's a nutshell of my process.
Hmm. Do you ever get stuck in that process?
Yeah, you can get stuck at almost every step of the way, but I think most often there's like stuck because of my own stumbling blocks of like, oh, I've put too much. I don't know. I've created too many options, or I can't come up with enough options based on what I'm seeing, or most often I'll get stuck in if in that improvisation I can't. I've realized I don't have the tool I need, and then I have to figure out ways to either sort of convert some other tool into the right tool, or take even more time and energy and like create something new, which is really hard to do on the spot sometimes. Like you might be like, well, I can create something like that, but I need a day and a crew and a lot of work to put it together, but it's possible. There's that kind of stuck. Yeah. And then there's I don't know if it's getting stuck as much as like, there's a point ultimately where you reach the hands off moment, where you're like, you could tweak something forever. At some point you just got to like let it go. Feel I sort of feel like if I'm aware of like I try to be aware of as many different notes I can, or as many different tweaks as I can on a piece. So say there's like 1,000 things I want to do to refine a piece, and but given the time and money and whatever, I may only get to like 500 of them, but at that point 500 is going to look pretty good to me. I wish I could go for the 1,000, but it's only going to be 500. Maybe an audience or someone is going to be aware of 300. So if I can get to 500, I'm good. It's just like sort of overshooting your goals as much as you can, so that when they tell you hands off, you can feel good about what you put out there.
Is it, I mean, I don't know, but is it weird to think like some nights there's like hundreds of people looking at your designs while you're just like hanging out or something? Is that ever like a weird thought?
Yeah, I mean, not anymore. I mean, there was definitely a point when early on when you sort of feel like I had to watch every performance, and the
Mhm.
idea of like walking away while the performance is happening was just like, something could go wrong, or I'm going to be aware they're going to see something that I never saw. And it's sort of going back to what I just said, but I mean, in terms of like, you just get to a point where you feel like you can walk away and be okay with that. Um, and also it ties into like the people you're working with. You build up a trust with the people that are actually running the show. Like the musicians playing the music, the stage managers that are actually calling the cues and making sure everything's moving and everyone's getting to the right place on time. It's such a leap of faith anyway, any given live performance. But to be able to put something out there and know that it will be run properly and then maintained properly over time, yeah, you just build up a confidence that all those things are going to happen. And then And then it's weird because then might have something that's running for like years, and you can go back and check on it every once in a while, but it's really become someone else's thing to, you know, and it becomes an object that you can look at from afar as opposed to, get emotionally caught up in it.
Hmm. So, in your relationships with other designers, how do you build good rapport with them? How do you build good relationships with them, like when you're in meetings or when you're disagreeing with them?
Right, right. I mean, theater is inherently social, and as a collaborative form, you have to be able to get along with people, and you can't just dictate that your desires on top of everyone else's, because it's very democratic that way, and that you everyone has a sort of equal voice. Maybe it depends on the director. I think the director is the one who ultimately moderates the relationships between the designers, or the designers and the writer, and the designer and the cast. But in sort of healthy collaborations, I'll say, in terms of where the director's really going to look to us for not just design ideas, but dramaturgical ideas, meaning ideas about the script and the storytelling, and maybe how performances are happening from the actors. Where we all feel sort of comfortable commenting on things that aren't necessarily in line with our skill set, but are related enough that we our opinion is important. Some people describe it as like, a designer is a good politician, and that you sort of have to be able to get along with everyone in the room, but then still be able to put your agenda forward,
Hmm.
and negotiate it. There's an element of debate. There's an element of argument. There's an element of persuasion. Yeah, and it's very different when you have a collaborative group that has worked together before versus the first time when you don't know anyone. The dynamic changes a lot when you've already worked together on several shows before. Shorthand develops, whereas when you are all new to each other, there's just you're trying to understand how people's tastes influence their choices, how they communicate things. When they're saying one thing, does it mean something else? Yeah, and that can be fun and scary because I've gotten into shows. I've worked on shows where I didn't know the director at all, and then we didn't have any conversations prior to actually getting into the theater together. And
Hmm.
so I made a lot of assumptions. They made a lot of assumptions, and it didn't really work out too well. But largely because we just didn't take the time to sort of check those assumptions in a conversation with each other. But it's really really fun when you have people that you've grown together a little bit, in relationship, and as friends, and you can actually have a lot of fun, and so that's very rewarding. As I'm sure, I mean, maybe if you've worked with other musicians, there are other musicians you probably work with, a lot. If you're in the pit with them versus a whole group of people that you've never worked with before, I imagine that dynamic's different.
Yeah, for sure. Some people, I've worked with some people that like to really push the tempo, and so I think, okay, I have to. This person likes to rush. It's my job to kind of hold them in check a little bit, and especially with music directors, it's always nice knowing the music director going in because then you kind of know what tone to expect in the pit, and you kind of know the pace at which they rehearse. And
Yeah, and that's very very much like what I look to a director for. I mean, for those things, I'm looking for a good leader.
hmm.
Who's not going to necessarily just say, "I want this," and then tell me how to achieve what they want. I want someone who's going to, listen to what I can bring to the table, and but share with me as best they can their vision, and then sort of lead us together to that ultimate goal. Because when there isn't leadership, then the vacuum sort of gets filled by other people's agendas, and it can get confusing and destructive sometimes.
Hmm. Someone has to lead and someone will lead. It just
Right,
depends on
right.
if it's the designated leader or someone. yeah, steps up because there isn't a leader.
Yeah, and actors are really good at sensing that as well. If they feel like they're not being shepherded well through a process, then oftentimes that's where you'll first see that sort of weakness happening. And we can, designers can gang up pretty solidly. um, and at least we were just so used to trying to like come together on an idea that oftentimes we can work more as a unit with or alongside a director as opposed to like within the design. And sometimes it happens too, I should say. I mean, that within a design group of like I'm just saying like lighting, set, costume, projection, sound, what have you. There might be one person. Often, I was going to say oftentimes it's the scenic designer, but that's not fair. Um, might just have like such a strong idea that they really, really, really have to get forward, even at the expense of the production as a whole or the story being told. It's harder as a lighting designer I mean, you can do it totally. I mean, like I could light a very realistic scene and bright pink because I feel very strongly that that's the way it should be done, and then it could totally tank the scene. But I'm not going to do that, or try
Yeah.
not to do that anyway.
That's a skill that is maybe or at least that I see lacking a lot nowadays is like how to disagree on something and still be friends and still be able to work together. Just like healthy disagreement, I think is something that's rare.
It's really hard, especially in this climate these days. Just when you're watching politics and stuff devolve into, he said, she said, and tribalism. I mean, people just refusing to sort of look at what the other people are saying with any sort of like presence and openness. And at the micro level of like a theatrical collaboration, it's definitely about that. Yeah, how to resolve, how to listen to each other when you inherently disagree, and then come to some sort of consensus to at least get something on the stage, so that you can then weigh it against the other options.
Hmm. So you've designed in the theater world for a while now. What changes have you seen happen over the years that you've been active?
I mean, the biggest in my world, the biggest thing has been the advent or the development of LED technology, replacing incandescent lighting, which is happening all over the place, not just in theater, but in people's homes, and in business, in the commercial world, especially. We have light sources that are hundreds of times more efficient than the original light bulb, that push to for efficiency and money savings from and using less electricity impacted our industry sort of late, um, but then it also opened up some doors. So there's certain things you can do with color now that we never used to be able to do. There's an argument to be made that we're sort of also losing something with the shift to LEDs in terms of color rendition, and particularly like nuanced color rendition, like if you're lighting someone's face
Hmm.
and having it look natural. It's actually hard to do with pure LED light. It's almost
Hmm.
there, but it's hard to do. But on the flip side, with LEDs, you can make really robust blues and greens and primary colors in ways that were hard to do before, at least on the level of with the brightness that we are used to now. So yeah, just living and working through that shift in technology of illumination technology has been terrific. Yeah, because when I was starting out, I was just using one kind of light source, mostly one kind of light source, and gels, which are just color media put in front of a light. To now, where I'm using largely LED rigs, which have different properties altogether in terms of fading, and as I said about color and brightness, everything's getting brighter and brighter. That's always been the case. Collectively, the human eye is getting more used to seeing things in brighter light. We're getting more conditioned to the kind of light sources we see at home on the stage. like if you go around your house, you may see, how many light bulbs are actually the old original filament bearing incandescent light bulb versus what's an LED source versus what's a halogen or what's a compact fluorescent tube. I mean, it's getting harder, and there's a lot of the old light bulbs you can't even buy anymore. They're just too inefficient. So that's the biggest thing is that technological change. I don't know that there's much else that's really that different. I mean, there's a lot more people coming out of school for lighting and for design. I was sort of right on the cusp of like it used to be mostly just apprenticeship, where you'd assist someone.
Hmm.
Uh, it's much more like a crafts person where you'd find sort of the master crafts person, and then you'd apprentice for them, and they would pass on their knowledge, and then you would once you got confident, and then develop the skills enough, you could go on and do it yourself, and then you do the same in return for another apprentice. When I was first getting into this, there were maybe like, I mean, there were probably like a dozen, but there were really like three major design graduate programs. Some people went, some people didn't. Some people went through that process of going to graduate school and learn and developing their skills and confidence that way, and their networking. And then a lot of us did it the old way. And but now it's almost every school has some sort of theater design program, for better or worse. Um, so there's just a lot more people. There are a lot more young people like looking for jobs in the entertainment business as designers and or technicians than there ever used to be. And I'm not so sure how many more. There's really that many more jobs available than there were 10 years ago. Maybe a little bit in some areas, but there's still the same number of Broadway theaters that there was for the most part, like 25 years ago, 50 years ago. So
Yeah. That's interesting about like lights getting brighter. Why do you think that's the direction we're going?
part of it is it's just like, when you have the technology to do something, it's very enticing to then use it. And so like as light bulbs get more efficient, they can also get brighter. And so part of it is you just like, oh, say in your living room, you just want to turn on a light and it you want the brighter level. It's just because it's giving you more clarity and filling in more shadows. And then it just becomes sort of like over time, choices like that build on each other, and after a while you're like, oh, if it's anything that's too dim, you're like, oh well, we got to make it brighter. Now we can do it. And so our eye sort of gets accustomed to like a certain level of brightness as sort of the norm. And I think our normal is now much brighter. It's also relative to other illuminated objects. I mean, ultimately, the ultimate comparison is to the sun and sky. We have a long way to go before like our living room lamp is going to be as bright as the sun. But but if you look at like how bright a television is relative to that light in your living room, the televisions are much brighter than they ever used to be, and so that's going to make your living room light seem very dim if you're using the old technology. But then if you get a new bulb, it's going to be closer and balanced. There's sort of lots of different sources of illumination competing for relative brightness.
Uh-huh.
Um, and you see that on stage, especially if you like a contemporary show, or like let's say Mean Girls is a good example. I don't know if you saw it or you know of it, but the scenery is largely a video wall. It's basically an LED video wall with pixels, and but those walls can get extremely bright. Like if you've ever been to Times Square in New York, or ever seen an LED billboard on the highway, those sources are incredibly bright, much brighter than you'd ever want in a on a stage because they would dominate the whole thing. But then it's that balance. So there are stories coming out of the Mean Girls production where the lighting designer had to really struggle to get the lighting equipment to balance with the LED wall, and it was a constant push and pull of like, can you turn that down? Can you turn that down so my lights can actually render the scene in a way that we can see what we need to see, because it was just getting blown out of the water by the LED wall. So that's a very specific example on a stage, but I think that happens all around us now. Car headlights are much brighter. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're safer, but again, relatively speaking, then the interior lighting in the car needs to be brighter. So it's all
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
a handoff that way.
Yeah. Hmm. That's interesting. I've never thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's other than just like the human eye, and illumination. I'm sure there's some other, maybe with sound in particular. Like what is too loud a sound to the human ear, or what is too quiet a sound for the human ear to hear. Or there's certain frequencies that maybe we're not hearing as well, or we're hearing differently than we did 20 years ago or 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess like sound like it is getting louder. You think of like some concerts are just so loud.
Yeah, but I just thinking about that. I mean, I remember going to concerts like in the '80s, and they were extremely loud. But then going to a similar concert, in the last decade, didn't feel as loud because the sound system was so much. I've had conversations with sound designers about this, because the equipment and the amplification technology was so much more superior to what was being used in the '80s, that you can get a cleaner sound, and you're hearing more frequencies, and it just sounds better, but it's not necessarily louder. Yeah, so it's like the volume may have actually been less, but it sounded better, because the only technology they had in the '80s, or '70s, was to just like push a bunch of voltage through a speaker, and
Mm-hmm.
volume was the thing. I don't know. So it's like, yeah, there's definitely ways that those the aesthetics of sound and light and all these things are sort of in our way of receiving and perceiving these elements are changing over time.
Mm-hmm. You're probably, I mean, I'm gonna make an assumption that you're at the point in your career where you don't take every job that comes your way. So like, in the beginning of your career, like, a lot of people tell you, and no matter what field you are, just like take everything, like do everything, take everything. But then it seems like you get to a point where you can start being a little more picky, and you can start being asking maybe for more money, or better working conditions or whatnot. So how do you pick what projects you want to work on?
Right. Learning how to say no is really important. Even now, I mean, you always want to say yes, just because most every project sounds really interesting in some level. You know, there are those projects you're like, I'm not going to make a cent on this, but it sounds really cool and I want to do it. But then inevitably, there's too many, there's too many offers, and you've got too many things vying for the same small portion of your calendar. And you have to say no to something, and it's just really hard. And some people try and avoid that by hiring people to serve as proxy for them, and hire an assistant or something to be in one place so that you can be in another place at the very same moment in time. That's really, really dangerous, particularly when it's, in many ways, as a designer, you're your brand. You want to be known as the person that can be present and in the room. So as a result, you have to say no more. Um, in my experience, I don't like substituting other people in for myself, and so I will just say no to things to keep my schedule sort of relatively clear. And then there's just projects that, like, maybe they're just not as exciting anymore. For me, a lot of my development was doing small off Broadway shows. I did hundreds of them. I mean, literally hundreds of them. And I got something out of almost every one of those projects, and I learned something, and I built on that, and it got really comfortable, and being able to navigate those. And so but then I wanted more of a challenge. I found it less challenging, so I wanted to move to something else, like a bigger show, or the kind of work that would give me better equipment or more money, or what have you. And so I just wanted to sort of broaden myself that way. So I started saying no to the smaller shows, and then saying yes to more of the bigger ones, and then ultimately you end up suddenly you're on Broadway and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got a lot of stuff. uh, I think I did this musical called Be More Chill
Mhm.
a couple of years ago. Actually, it's still going on. I mean, I did it in London just before this whole virus thing happened, and we were about to put it up in Chicago right now, which hopefully we'll do later in the summer. But fingers crossed. But that was a show like once we transferred to Broadway, and I was like suddenly I had all the toys I could ever want, and I actually got intimidated by the light plot because I was like, wow, this is daunting. I've never had this much technology and this many lights as before, and so I got to figure this out. There's a lot of different factors why you might say no to something. Even if it's just like I don't want to travel as much, so I'm gonna say no to a lot more projects that are regional projects, so I can stay home and be with my family. It's factors like that that start to play an important part of life, and then obviously financial considerations. If Project A is paying $10 and Project B is paying $100, then but they both want to happen at the same time, then I'm really going to weigh Project B over A because um, in this period of time, $100 is going to help me pay rent and you know buy food and things like that. But it's just like learning how to say no, and hopefully in a way that's tactful, in a way that, especially if it's with collaborators you have worked with before and people in relationships you want to maintain, but for whatever reason it doesn't work out, you want to be able to say no, but no, but here's this person that you can help, or no, but I can be available later, or try to be no but as opposed to just nope, can't do it.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, leaving that door open.
Yeah, because but saying yes to everything can ultimately get you in a fair amount of trouble.
Yeah. So, advice for young lighting designers who want to do this career, full time, professionally, they're all in. What advice would you give them?
There's just so much of it advice to offer. It's hard to like nail down any one major thing. But what I do like to tell students and people getting interested in this, even thinking about this, is that try to understand what kind of work you want to do, because in terms of what kind of lighting, as I've already talked about all the different sort of options that are out there. It's not just lighting plays and theatrical lighting design, because in many ways the work isn't what's gonna be. The work is hard. I mean, let's not kid ourselves, but oftentimes you're enjoying it so much that you forget how hard it is. What's really really hard is the freelance lifestyle, actually.
Hmm.
um, and I think a lot of people aren't fully aware what that is. You don't go to school for that. You're going to school to, if this is what you're doing. I mean, you're learning skills about your craft and design and collaboration, and and even like how to you know be a small business. But freelancing, where you don't know where your next paycheck is going to come from, weeds a lot of people out very very fast. They come to New York and then they realize, wow, okay, rent is really, it's not just expensive, it's really expensive in New York. How do I pay that if I don't know who's going to write me a paycheck? And how many gigs do I have to take to add it up to that? It's tragically difficult. The biggest advice is just like, it's hard. I mean, it's like until you live it, you don't really know how hard it is. But just trying to explain that, like, you have to think about these other things that aren't necessarily related to the craft of lighting design, if you really want to think about a career in this. So to that end, I'm a big proponent of internships and observing. If you can't do an internship because you've got a summer job or something like that, but you have a little bit of time where you can like approach someone to just watch a tech or sit behind them as they're putting a show together or focusing a show or something like that. I mean, just observe and soak it in a bit and see what the world is like. On top of that, if you can then sort of like tag along with a designer, in their day to day to get a little bit of a sense of what that lifestyle's like, that's, I think, really, really helpful just to see how that person navigates those waters. Yeah. So I'm always telling people, like students, or if they're even thinking about it, just like figure out a way to get involved with a theater company where you might see several different designers because we all have different personalities and strengths and weaknesses, and just sort of seeing what comes out of all that. I started out when I was still in college. I had a summer job working for Maine State Music Theater, which was happened to be on my college campus. So it was sort of nice because I knew the theater really well because it was where I was in the winter. But just seeing how a theater company works was fascinating to me, and learning just the relationships, the hierarchy between the artistic director and the staff, and then just the hierarchy within a particular project of a director and the designers and the technicians and stage managers and actors. It was all really important to see just what that world was like and talk to them, be able to hang out with them, at intermission or between shows, and learning their stories of like what it's like to be basically an actor traveling around from show to show to show was really cool. It didn't deter me enough, I guess.
What do you think gets you through those tough times in your career?
My college mentor said to me, he's like, it's really important you just, more than anything, that you develop like a really strong sort of life philosophy, something that in whatever way your understanding of the world and your place in it, and how develop something that's not going to let you get beat down by these things, whether it's religion or, actual philosophy or music or something, that you can ground yourself with and sort of help evaluate your choices as you move through a very nebulous world of freelancing and theater. One thing theater does have, that at least the professional theater has, which I was welcome to me, was structure. There's schedules. There's like, and people have roles, and it's very much, the roles are really important for for the show to go on. Everyone has to do their thing in the right time at the right place, and that structure was really helpful to me because I think I lacked a lot of that, and it was helpful to have other people sort of like creating that structure for me. Like, it's really helpful for me to say to a production manager, like, when are these deadlines, and say to a stage manager, like, what's my call time. Other than that, um, everything else you have to have in place on your own because nobody's going to do it for you. It's like just developing a mindset that will help you sort of, yeah, ride those waves when they're rough,
Mhm.
and let you cruise through when it's going well. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's interesting because so little of this is about necessarily like your skills or your talent. I mean, that helps.
Mhm.
Obviously your level of confidence in your craft is going to help you a lot in terms of just, again, whether or not you're able to take risks, or whether you can weather risks and weather challenges. Even to this day, I mean, 26, 7 years in, oh, okay, at least I know, in the back of my head, I did get a Tony Award at one time. um, and so I have that, and no one's going to take that away from me. And I can always give myself a little, like, pat on the back for that, and or a
Mhm.
leg up, when things get hard. It may not necessarily get me a job or a paycheck, but it'll help. And it just, I can feel good about myself as a designer occasionally when I think about that. But it's important to have other things too. Anyway, even to this day, I guess I'm still looking for those things to help. Uh, it never stops.
Hmm. Yeah, it's almost I've been thinking like, okay, what's my strategy for like if the calendar's empty and I'm feeling down and I want to quit, like what is my strategy going to be in those moments when it's just so hard?
Yeah, yeah. Just having faith. I mean, a lot of it's just blind faith, crazily
Mhm.
enough. I mean, like, even now, I mean, like, this whole coronavirus aside, I basically had gigs up to, was talking about some gigs starting in September and next fall. That's about as far my calendar was full. As far as 2021, maybe one or two maybes. But other than that, I have no idea what's going to happen then. Now I've been doing this enough that I'm really confident, maybe 97% confident that something's going to fill that time. And it's just having that confidence that, oh, look, there's a big blank spot in the calendar. I'm screwed versus something will get in there.
Yeah.
Just keep looking, keep talking to people, let people know you're out there, and eventually something will fill that time.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time.
you.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Zach Rimbold.